Name on the screen was Evan Torres, the plumber I had hired that morning to check a stubborn leak in my basement. I expected a routine question, maybe an update about the old pipes that ran under my house. Instead, his voice reached me in a shaky whisper that made my heart freeze. "Mom, who is down here with me?" Before I could answer, the line went silent. My name is Helen Marwood. I am 66 years old, a widow, and I have lived in the same weathered house on the outskirts of Ridgefield, Wisconsin for more than 4 decades. My husband Franklin and I bought this place when we were young enough to believe we could fix anything with determination and a good set of tools. The house has survived storms, winters, and years of quiet memories. I always believed I knew every board, every creak, every hidden flaw in its bones. But that phone call proved I was wrong. I tried calling Evan back only to reach his voicemail. A cold wave rolled through me. I grabbed my coat and keys, barely remembering to shut the front door behind me as I hurried to my car. The drive home felt slower than ever. Every red light seemed to linger. Every slow-moving truck felt like an insult delivered by the universe. My mind raced with explanations that made sense and explanations that frightened me. Maybe Evan heard the old water heater kicking on. Maybe he mistook a distant sound for footsteps. Maybe his phone had simply died. But none of those explanations matched the tremor in his voice or the way the call had dropped so abruptly. When I turned onto my gravel driveway, I saw Evan's van parked exactly where he had left it. That should have comforted me, but something felt wrong. The air was still. The yard looked undisturbed. Yet an uneasiness settled in my stomach like a stone. I opened my front door and called his name. No answer. The house remained quiet, except for the steady ticking of the hallway clock. Then I noticed the basement door. It was open. And that was when the fear truly began. The basement door had no reason to be open. I had closed it that morning after showing Evan where the shut-off valve was. Now it hung slightly ajar as if someone had pushed it open from below. A faint draft drifted up the stairs carrying the smell of damp concrete and something older that I could not quite place. I stood at the top step gripping the handrail until my knuckles whitened. Evan. I called his name again, hoping to hear his footsteps or even the sound of his tools shifting. Nothing. Only the distant hum of the furnace and the low creak of wood adjusting to the cold. I flipped the light switch. The single bulb at the bottom flickered unevenly before holding a steady dull glow. I took a careful step down. After more than 40 years in this house, I thought I understood its sounds. The settling of beams and the rattling of old vents had been a soundtrack to my life, but that afternoon everything felt unfamiliar, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Evan's toolbox sat near the water heater exactly where he had placed it earlier. His phone lay face down beside it. The screen cracked as though it had been dropped with force. A chill crawled up my spine. I knelt and picked it up, but it refused to turn on. That was when I noticed the wooden door at the far end of the basement. For years it had remained shut, a leftover from when the previous owners used the space for storage. Franklin had sealed it long ago, insisting there was nothing but old boards behind it. Yet now the door stood open, revealing darkness beyond. The edges of the frame showed fresh markings, faint scrapes in the wood that had not been there before. It looked as if someone had forced it open from the inside. I called Evan's name one last time. The silence that answered me was colder than the winter air outside, and in that silence I realized something I never wanted to believe. My house was hiding something. I moved toward the open doorway with slow, careful steps, feeling the cold of the concrete floor through my shoes. The air beyond the threshold was heavier, almost stale, as if it had been trapped for years. I raised my flashlight and swept the beam across the small storage room. Dust coated the shelves. Old paint cans sat untouched. Nothing looked disturbed until I reached the back wall. Several boards were missing, leaving a rectangular opening large enough for a grown man to crawl through. The edges of the remaining boards were splintered, and the nails scattered on the floor looked as if they had been pried out recently. Behind the broken wall lay a narrow passage of rough stone widening gradually into darkness. That was when I saw the glove. Evan's work glove lay half-folded near the opening, as if it had been dropped or pulled from his hand. A faint trail on the dusty floor led from the tool area across the room and straight into the opening. The line was uneven and broken, like something heavy had been dragged. My mouth went dry. I crouched and touched the marks. The dust shifted easily, confirming they were fresh. Had Evan tried to crawl in there? Had someone pulled him in? The thought made my stomach twist. I leaned closer to the opening, aiming the flashlight into the narrow passage. The beam stretched only a few feet before being swallowed by blackness. The walls inside were old stones shaped by hand and age. They did not belong to a simple farmhouse basement. A soft sound drifted out from the tunnel. It was not a voice, not quite. More like the faint rustle of someone moving far down the passage. I jerked back, instinctively bumping the shelf behind me. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Every instinct told me to run. But another voice in my mind whispered that Evan might still be alive. Slowly I backed out of the storage room, keeping the light trained on the strange opening until I reached the main basement floor. When I finally turned and hurried up the stairs, I realized my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the railing. Whatever was behind that wall, whatever had forced it open, was no longer a forgotten part of the house. It was awake. And it had taken Evan somewhere I could not see. I shut the basement door the moment I reached the top of the stairs and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. My fingers fumbled as I dialed 911. The dispatcher listened intently while I explained that a worker had vanished inside my house and that I had found an opening leading to what looked like an underground tunnel. Her voice remained calm but firm as she told me to stay upstairs and wait for officers to arrive. The minutes stretched like hours. Every small sound in the house made me jump. I kept glancing at the basement door, half expecting it to swing open on its own. When red and blue lights finally washed across my living room walls, I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost brought me to tears. 2 officers entered my house. Detective Laura Kendrick introduced herself first. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and steady. Officer Blake Turner followed, younger but alert, scanning every corner, as if danger could be hiding in the walls themselves. I guided them to the basement door, explaining what I had seen. They descended the stairs together, lights raised. I waited at the top, holding my breath while their footsteps echoed in the space below. Detective Kendrick called up, asking me to join them but to stay near the staircase. I gripped the railing and walked down slowly. The detective showed me the broken wall, the pried boards, and the trail in the dust. She crouched near the opening, shining her light into the tunnel. Her expression darkened. "This is not part of the original construction," she said. "Someone expanded this. Someone used it." Officer Turner examined the scattered tools and Evan's cracked phone. He looked up at me with a seriousness that made my stomach drop. "We have enough to confirm this is not an accident." For the first time since the phone call, the fear inside me found a name. Evan had not simply disappeared. Something or someone had taken him. Detective Kendrick asked if there was anyone I wanted to call. My first thought was my son Christopher. Even when we disagreed, he had always come running whenever something felt wrong. I stepped into the kitchen and dialed his number. The moment he heard my voice, he said he was on his way. I barely had time to sit before his car pulled into the driveway. Christopher rushed inside, still in his work jacket. His eyes swept the living room, then landed on the basement door. "Mom, what happened?" His voice shook slightly. I told him everything, from the phone call to the hidden tunnel to the officers now investigating downstairs. Before he could respond, the front door opened again. Jenna, my daughter-in-law, walked in with her arms folded tightly across her chest. She had not spoken much to me in months, except for polite greetings. Today she looked agitated, as if she already knew something she had not been told. "I heard noise from the street," she said flatly. "What is going on here?" I tried to explain, but she cut me off with a sigh. "Helen, this house is too old, too dangerous. You need to move out of here before something worse happens." Her tone carried impatience more than concern, as if this ordeal were an inconvenience rather than a crisis. Christopher shot her a warning look, but she ignored it. She stared toward the basement with an expression I could not read. It was not fear, it was closer to calculation. Before I could ask what she was thinking, my daughter Lily arrived. She burst through the door and wrapped her arms around me without a word. She smelled of winter air and lavender lotion, the scent she had worn since high school. When she pulled back, her eyes were full of worry. "Mom, are you hurt? Did someone break in?" I shook my head, though my voice trembled as I answered, "Evan is missing. He was down there and now he is gone." Lily's hand tightened around mine while Christopher paced the living room, trying to make sense of everything. Jenna stood apart, her gaze returning again and again to the basement door. In that moment, I felt the weight of something heavier than fear. The house was keeping secrets, but so was someone standing right in front of me. The investigation stretched into the evening. More officers arrived and a small team began documenting every inch of the basement. I stayed upstairs with my family, listening to the low murmur of voices drifting up through the floorboards. Every so often someone would call out an instruction or the scrape of equipment would echo through the house. Detective Kendrick eventually returned to the living room holding a small evidence bag. Inside was an old black and white photograph coated in dust. She asked if it belonged to me. I studied the faded image closely. 4 people stood in front of what looked like an early version of my house. The porch was smaller. The windows had a different frame, but the outline was unmistakable. These people had stood in front of my home long before I ever lived here. 3 men and 1 woman faced the camera, their expressions stiff. Their clothing suggested the late 1930s or early 1940s. None of them resembled anyone from my family, but as my eyes drifted to the woman's coat, my breath caught. Pinned to her collar was a brooch made of 3 interlocking circles. I had seen that design before. My late mother-in-law had given me a similar brooch on my wedding day, telling me it had been passed through the family for generations. I had worn it only once because it was too heavy and ornate for my taste. Detective Kendrick turned the photograph over, revealing faint handwriting on the back. It read the Hanover Circle 1940. Christopher leaned closer, frowning. Never seen that before. Jenna, however, had gone very still. Her gaze fixed on the photo as if it meant something more to her than she wanted anyone to notice. Lily asked whether the picture could be connected to the tunnel. The detective said it was possible, and that the structure seemed older than the house itself. As I stared at the photograph, a new realization crept in. The secrets beneath my home did not begin with me, or even with Franklin. They belonged to a history I had never been told. It was close to midnight when a patrol car pulled into my driveway again. Detective Kendrick stepped inside with urgency in her voice. "Helen, we found him." For one brief moment, relief flooded through me so quickly my knees weakened. But her expression warned me not to celebrate too soon. Evan had been discovered a mile from my property, lying near a line of trees off an old service road. He was unconscious but breathing. Paramedics had taken him to the nearest hospital. The detective offered to drive me and Lily there while Christopher followed in his own car. Jenna chose to stay behind, claiming she felt unwell. Something about her tone made the hair on my neck rise. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly as we waited outside the exam room. When Evan finally regained consciousness, his eyes darted around the room in panic. He tried to sit up, but the nurse urged him to stay still. Detective Kendrick spoke gently, asking him what had happened. Evan swallowed hard. His voice was hoarse. "I heard someone down there. They were whispering. I thought maybe you had another worker on the property. I followed the noise and the wall just opened." He paused as though replaying the moment in his mind. Then everything went dark. He described waking in a small underground room lit by a single bulb, old furniture, stacks of files, dust everywhere. He heard footsteps somewhere behind a second doorway, but never saw who they belonged to. Before he could escape, something struck him from behind again. The next thing he remembered was crawling along a dirt tunnel until he reached daylight. Detective Kendrick exchanged a tense look with Officer Turner. This was no simple accident and not the work of someone hiding temporarily. Whoever had taken Evan knew those tunnels well. As I listened to him speak, the fear inside me twisted into something sharper. Someone had been living beneath my home, and they were willing to attack to protect whatever they were hiding. By the time we returned home, the officers had cleared out for the night, leaving tape across the basement door and a list of instructions for my safety. I tried to sleep, but the house felt different now. Every creak in the hallway felt too sharp. Every shift of the wind outside made me wonder if someone else was listening from beneath the floorboards. Christopher stayed in the guest room while Lily sat with me in the kitchen drinking tea that neither of us finished. Eventually she convinced me to rest, but sleep did not come easily. When I finally drifted off, I jolted awake just an hour later with a strange memory of Franklin's workshop lingering in my mind. Something about a box he once told me never to open. I slipped out of bed and made my way to the detached workshop behind the house. The cold air stung my cheeks. Inside the workshop, everything smelled of old wood and motor oil. Franklin's tools still hung neatly on the wall just the way he left them. I felt my throat tighten as I ran my hand across the workbench. Then I saw it. A small metal lockbox tucked beneath a stack of dusty tarps. I pulled it out. The box was heavy, and my hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were letters wrapped in a faded ribbon. The top one was addressed to me in Franklin's handwriting. My breath caught as I unfolded it. He wrote about discovering the tunnels shortly after we bought the house, about finding records and symbols he did not understand, and about men who visited him claiming to be from a private historical society called the Hanover Circle. They insisted the tunnels were part of a forgotten wartime project and that keeping them hidden was essential for national security. Franklin admitted he never told me because he feared pulling me into something dangerous. He apologized for leaving the burden to me, saying he hoped the truth would never surface in my lifetime. Beneath the letters were old documents stamped with government seals, along with maps of the tunnel system sprawling beneath our land and beyond. I sank onto a wooden stool as the truth settled over me. The tunnels were not abandoned structures. They were part of something planned, maintained, and protected for decades. And now that someone had attacked Evan, it was clear that whatever Franklin tried to shield me from was no longer sleeping beneath my home. It was awake, moving, and watching. The next evening the house felt unbearably still. Christopher had gone to pick up some clothes from his apartment, while Lily prepared dinner in the kitchen. I tried to focus on the letters spread across the table, but my thoughts kept drifting to the tunnel, the photograph, and the way Jenna had looked at the basement door. Night settled over the house. The wind rattled the porch steps. I gathered the documents and locked them in a drawer. I was about to turn off the lights when a faint thump sounded from the back of the house. It was soft, almost polite, as if someone wanted to be heard but not noticed. I moved slowly down the hallway. Another thump, then a low whisper of movement. When I reached the dining room, I froze. Two figures stood near the sliding door, their silhouettes sharp against the dim outside light. Before I could scream, a hand clamped over my mouth. I was pulled backward, my shoulder hitting the wall. Pain shot down my arm. The person holding me spoke in a low voice. "Stay quiet and nothing happens to you." The words were calm, practiced. Another figure stepped forward. My stomach dropped. It was Jenna. Her expression was not frantic or confused. It was composed, almost cold. She told the men to search the study. They obeyed without hesitation. I tried to pull away, but Jenna gripped my wrist harder. "Do not make this harder, Helen." I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "Why are you doing this?" She glanced toward the basement door. "Because someone in this family has something that belongs to us. Something your husband promised but never delivered." In that moment everything aligned. Her strange glances, her push for me to move out, her insistence that the house was unsafe. She had not been concerned for me. She had been searching. The men returned frustrated. They asked where the papers were. Jenna stepped closer, her voice quiet but cutting. "You are going to open the basement door for us. You know what we are looking for." My pulse hammered in my ears. I realized that Evan had not been the target. I was. And Jenna was willing to tear apart the entire family to get what she wanted. Jenna tightened her grip on my arm and motioned for the men to follow her toward the basement. My feet felt heavy as stone. Each step down the hallway made the air colder until the house no longer felt like mine. It felt claimed by something darker. At the top of the basement stairs, Jenna pushed me forward. "Open it," she ordered. Her voice held no hesitation. I knew that if I refused, she would not back down. The men behind her shifted impatiently as though time mattered to them in a way I did not yet understand. My hand hovered over the lock. For a moment I considered giving in, but then I remembered something Franklin had once said while installing new wiring in the workshop. "If anything ever goes wrong, pull the red handle. It triggers the old fire alarm line." It was a direct call to the local fire station, a system too old to be digital and impossible to disable without cutting the entire grid. They did not know about it. Jenna did not know about it. I took a shaky breath. "All right," I said. "I will open it," but my voice wavered intentionally, drawing their attention to my trembling hands. As Jenna stepped closer, I turned sharply, shoved her off balance, and bolted toward the back door. The men lunged after me. My shoulder slammed into the workshop door as I stumbled inside. Their footsteps thundered behind me. With every ounce of strength I had left, I reached up and pulled the red handle mounted near the ceiling beam. Within seconds, a piercing alarm echoed through the night. Jenna screamed for the men to grab the documents. They scattered in panic, unsure what the alarm meant. Red lights began flashing throughout the house. The old system still worked. Sirens approached rapidly from the road. By the time the officers burst through the front door, Jenna and the two men were cornered in the hallway, their attempt to flee cut short by the arriving fire crew. Detective Kendrick arrived moments later, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Jenna was handcuffed while still shouting at me, "You do not understand what you are keeping from the world." But I did understand one thing. The danger had finally stepped into the light. The house felt strangely quiet once Jenna and the two men were taken away. Officers swept every room while Detective Kendrick guided me to a chair in the living room. Lily sat beside me, gripping my hand, refusing to let go. Christopher arrived minutes later, pale and shaken after hearing what happened. He sank onto the sofa with his head in his hands. I could see the guilt settling over him even before he spoke. "I should have seen something," he whispered. "I should have known Jenna was involved in this." But none of us had known. Jenna had hidden her intentions behind polite smiles and calm tones for years. Now the mask had fallen. A sudden knock at the door made everyone look up. A woman in a dark coat stepped inside, accompanied by two federal agents. She introduced herself as Naomi Prescott, director of a department responsible for managing sensitive historical materials. Her tone was measured, almost gentle, but there was weight behind every word. Director Prescott explained that the Hanover Circle had existed for decades as a private group that believed certain wartime records should never reach the public. Over the years, the group fractured. Some members remained committed to secrecy, while others believed the information should be exposed. The latter faction was the one Jenna had aligned herself with. She asked me if I had found anything in Franklin's possession. I hesitated. The lockbox in the workshop weighed heavily on my mind. Instead of handing it over immediately, I asked her a question. What will happen to these materials once they leave my home? Director Prescott paused before answering. A review board will determine what is preserved, what is classified, and what may be shared with historians. Nothing will be destroyed without oversight. It was not a perfect answer, but it was better than silence. I agreed to release the documents with one condition. An independent panel of historians and ethics experts must be involved in the process. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a small measure of control return to my hands. The truth would not be buried in darkness again, not without a fight. 3 months passed before the house finally felt like mine again. The basement had been sealed and reinforced. The tunnel entrance was documented and closed under federal supervision. For a while I avoided that part of the house altogether, choosing instead to spend my mornings on the porch watching the sun rise over the fields. Peace returned slowly, like a guest unsure of its welcome. Christopher visited often. He carried a heaviness in his eyes that had not been there before. One evening he sat across from me at the kitchen table and apologized for not seeing what Jenna had become. I told him he could not blame himself for the choices she made. Healing took time and he was trying. That mattered more than anything. Lily remained my constant support. She drove me to meetings with Director Prescott and the review board, who were now sifting carefully through the documents and maps Franklin had left behind. Some of the materials had been approved for eventual release to historians. Others required more deliberation. The process was slow, thoughtful, transparent. Exactly what I had asked for. Evan visited too. He walked into my kitchen with a shy smile and a box of pastries as a thank you. His recovery had been steady, though he still avoided basements. We talked for a while about ordinary things like weather and gardening. When he left, he promised he would return to check on me, but only if I hired a different plumber for anything involving the lower floor. We both laughed more than I expected. One quiet afternoon I stood alone in the backyard watching the workshop door sway gently in the breeze. I thought of Franklin, of the secrets he carried, of the burden he tried so hard to keep from me. I wished he had trusted me enough to share it, but I finally understood. He was protecting the life we built, not hiding it from me. As I looked toward the house, I felt something settle inside me. Not fear, not confusion, just clarity. The past had finally been acknowledged. The truth had finally been brought into the open. To anyone listening to my story, I will say this. Families survive when honesty is chosen over silence. Buried truths always find their way to the surface. And courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand up anyway. If my story meant something to you, share your thoughts in the comments, like and share the video to help others find it, and take care of the places you call home. They remember